So I want to tell you a story about making dinner. Maybe something like this has happened to you recently. Last night, I decided to make a salad. So I go into my fridge, I grab my lettuce, spinach, tomatoes, parsley, and then I see it, a cucumber, innocently sitting in my crisper, and I freak out. Was this cucumber safe? Would this cucumber make me sick? I was panicking because I've been hearing about a cucumber recall in a salmonella outbreak. It's sickened dozens of people so far.
Company Sun-Fed Produce has recalled cucumbers sold between October 12th and November 26th in more than 24 states. They were sold in some Albertsons, Wegmans, and Walmart.
I didn't want to just throw away this cucumber. It wasn't cheap, and I love putting them in my salads. So there I was, off the clock, but putting my reporter hat back on to investigate the origin of my cucumber. My cucumber came from a farm called Sunset. This recall is for a distributor called Sun-Fed. I Googled, I researched, I called my best friend. Sunset cucumbers are grown in Canada. The recalled ones are grown in Mexico. Still, should I risk it? My friend said no way, not worth it. But I was like, they're probably okay. And I thought, hey, I don't bungee jump or skydive. This is my version of thrill-seeking, eating cucumbers. And I'm also just tired of worrying about food because of a recall. It feels like it's been happening a lot. In recent months, we've seen recalls over carrots, eggs, and onions.
I think you're not the only one who's going through and trying to look at all of their foods.
That's Rachel Rubine. She covers the Food and Drug Administration for The Post. And so I really wanted to ask Rachel, are all of these outbreaks and recalls normal?
I will tell you, in my household, we went through looking at all our boxes of waffles a few months ago because there was a waffle recall. But is this normal question? I've been asking a lot of food safety experts that same question. And, they were hard-pressed to say that it's not normal. They said that this does feel like a wide range of products, but that these recalls do happen and some of them are prominent brands and there's a lot of communication around them.
Okay, but are there more recalls now than before? Do we know?
It's hard to say for sure. And actually, the Post just reported that recalls appear on track, at least at the moment, to slightly dip this year. But we also seem to be likely hearing about them more because of the news and social media, and everything is amplified. So it feels a bit like, what's going on?
Rachel told me something else really fascinating. These recalls, in of themselves, are not necessarily bad news. It takes a lot of detective work to trace a salmonella outbreak to a single vegetable from a single farm. And it's good that so many of us are hearing this news. Notices about recalled foods could mean at least some parts of the food safety system are working. From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Elahe Izadi. It's Thursday, December 5th. Today, Rachel explains how these outbreaks happen, the future of our food safety system, and what we can all do to make sure the produce in our kitchens is safe to eat. Rachel, I told you about my cucumber debacle, but can you tell me about all these latest outbreaks? Kind of run through some of the ones maybe we've heard of, maybe we've forgotten about, and the origin of those foods, and what was it that caused that food to be recalled?
Yeah, well, let's start with cucumbers. There's a salmonella outbreak right now. So far, as of Wednesday, it's sickened 68 people in 19 states. As you mentioned, the cucumbers appear to be grown in Mexico. There's been some recalls of cucumbers like Sun-Fed, Russ Davis. There's also carrots right now.
And there are now some growing concerns about an E. coli outbreak that's tied to organic, whole, and baby carrots.
An E. coli outbreak in carrots sickened 39 people, including one death in 18 states.
Wow.
And this is like bagged organic carrots, so whole carrots, baby carrots there.
And where are those carrots grown? Do we know?
It was supplied by Grimway Farms.
Organic pasture-raised eggs sold in 25 Costco stores and 5.
There's a recall right now over eggs.
States have been recalled because of potential salmonella contamination.
There was also the high-profile recall from Boar's Head liverwurst. There was slivered onions that were recalled that were on McDonald's quarter-pound hamburgers, which was one of the kind of high-profile ones. That investigation is now closed.
I see. Okay, so a lot of these recalls are flagging different bacteria. There's salmonella, listeria, E. coli. Rachel, just what are these bacteria? What makes them a threat to humans?
Yeah, so they're all bacteria that can, make people sick. E. coli, people have, kind of healthy E. coli in their intestinal tract, but there is some that can make people sick. And usually around like 3 to 4 days for E. coli, some of the symptoms are like diarrhea, vomiting, salmonella, about 12 to 72 hours after eating contaminated food. Symptoms also like diarrhea, fever, stomach cramps. There's listeria bacteria, which, usually about within 2 weeks, but it can be up till 10 weeks till you actually get sick.
So just who is responsible for making sure our food is safe?
Yeah, I think it's multi-pronged. I mean, obviously there are the producers of the food, the facilities, the plants that are, charged with creating a clean environment and following regulations. Then you have the federal government standpoint, which is the Food and Drug Administration, which oversees the vast majority of food products, like 78% of food products. Think dairy and produce and nuts. Then you have the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which oversees some meat products. The FDA oversees some meat as well. And, they're in charge with regulations. They're in charge with inspections. Some states actually are in charge of inspections as well. So, you could see how it's sort of this kind of complex, multi-pronged system.
Yeah. And then let's say, God forbid, bacteria or something gets onto food. Then who's responsible for figuring that out and then flagging people and making sure that more people don't consume this food and get sick?
Yeah. So this forensic examination of the food is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is charged with this disease detective work on the human illness side.
What's kind of crazy to me, Rachel, is that I know about E. coli and like undercooked meat, right? Or like or salmonella, like if you eat raw eggs, like we always hear the warnings about if you have raw sort of meat or I guess raw animal products that you're at risk at some of these. But now I'm here, we're hearing about salmonella and E. coli like on vegetables and produce. How does this bacteria get onto these foods that we're talking about, like slivered onions?
It's a great question. I mean, there are kind of different ways within the environment that this can happen. It can be like contaminated soil. It can be like contaminated water. This can be from, animals. And, what we're talking about here is it can come from animal poop, essentially.
Oh, that's like in the water and that's in the soil and that could get on produce.
That's a way that this produce can become contaminated.
Oh, wow. It's disgusting.
Also, other ways that food can get contaminated, which is just kind of like in the supply chain. If food gets left out on a loading dock for too long, but it's a food that needs to be refrigerated, that sort of thing as well.
Wow. Well, one thing I'm sort of fascinated by is how the government even knows that, like, these are the cucumbers that made these people sick. So I think it would be helpful to walk through an example of an outbreak and a recall. So let's start with the McDonald's quarter pounders. People who ate them were sick in this fall, and that was linked. When I first heard about it, I thought, oh, it's got to be the patties, right? The beef patties. But no, it was the onions. And the onions were part of an E. coli outbreak. So how does the government even figure out It's not the meat, it's not the cheese, it's the onions.
Yeah,
I thought onions were safe, Rachel, to be honest. Now I'm like worried about my onions. How do they know?
Putting onions on all your salads.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting disease detective work. That's kind of how it's approached. So this fall, people who, got sick, went to their doctor. If it came back that they had a foodborne illness, that information would be kind of put into a system maintained by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And so essentially, in conjunction with the state public health and local public health, they figured out that the source was likely McDonald's and likely McDonald's Quarter Pounder.
But how did they do that? How did they figure out that it was the McDonald's onions?
Once you have sort of that cluster of cases, state and local health departments will go and interview the people who got sick. So they would, if I was sick, they would ask me a long list of questions, basically trying to figure out everything that I ate. And with the McDonald's instance, out of the 81 people they interviewed, 80, so 99%, reported eating McDonald's. 75 people were able to remember the menu items that they ate of McDonald's. And then the vast majority of those reported eating a menu item containing fresh slivered onions.
And so then what did the CDC do with that information?
So the CDC was doing the human illness investigation, and then the FDA was sort of investigating the onions. And what ended up happening is Taylor Farms initiated a recall of the onions. The onions were taken off the menu. McDonald's then had to kind of find another supplier of the onions, and the outbreak investigation has since closed. It actually closed on Tuesday.
Oh, wow. Well, Rachel, one of my first reactions when I hear about another recall is, should I trust the food I'm buying? Or how can I trust the food I'm buying? Because these recalls are happening after the food is already out in the system, right? But hearing you explain this story about the McDonald's Quarter Pounders, it makes me also think about, well, maybe a recall is a sign that the food systems are working, because is there a world in which we wouldn't have known about this at all? People wouldn't even know that there's some sort of issue with these slivered onions and the McDonald's Quarter Pounders.
Yeah, I mean, I think you talk to some experts and they say that is good public health work, being able to track down these genetic fingerprints of certain bacteria. But kind of to your point on public confidence, there was a Gallup poll from September that showed public confidence in the government's ability to protect the food supply is at an all-time low. 57% of people surveyed expressed at least a fair amount of confidence. 28% of Americans did not have much confidence, and 14% had none at all.
After the break, what contaminated liverwurst can tell us about the cracks in our food safety system? We'll be right back. Rachel, we're still learning details about some of these more recent outbreaks, like cucumbers and carrots and eggs, but I know you investigated a different outbreak recently, and that can offer some clues about weaknesses in our food system and in preventing outbreaks. And this is from the Boar's Head meat processing plant. You mentioned Boar's Head. Can you just remind us what this outbreak was?
Yeah, you might remember in August and September hearing a lot about liverwurst. What happened is there were people getting hospitalized and there were deaths, a total of 10 deaths and 61 cases of people who became sick after eating Boar's Head products, which was traced back to liverwurst.
And then where was that traced to? Was it traced to a specific plant?
This was a listeria outbreak that was traced back to a specific plant in Jarrett, Virginia that produced Boar's Head liverwurst.
The plant is now closed and Boar's Head no longer produces liverwurst anywhere.
My colleague Joe Hyman and I kind of pieced together what happened here through looking at inspection reports and talking to people who worked at the plant. From the documents and firsthand accounts, there was filthy conditions, old equipment, poor cleaning. So it was kind of a recipe for this kind of contamination.
Like over time, they had these problems for how long?
The investigation reports that were released from Freedom of Information Act were about 2 years of reports.
Oh, wow.
When we read through them and once we talked to food safety experts afterwards, their takeaway was that these reports were really striking. They're seeing black mold. They're seeing meat residue at the plant. They were taken aback by it. In talking to food safety system experts and in talking to lawmakers, they have a lot of questions in terms of why this plant continued to stay open, who sort of knew what when, why was there, not kind of a more official alert earlier about all of these violations racking up.
And what's been Boar's Head's response to that?
Boar's Head would not respond to questions directly recounted by employees. A spokesperson said that they can't comment on the plant due to ongoing litigation, but that Boar's Head, quote, deeply and sincerely regretted the tragic impact of the listeria outbreak. Boar's Head previously said that its plant team had immediately remedied noncompliance notifications issued by inspectors.
So what's your takeaway, Rachel? What does this example about the liverwurst at Boar's Head and the listeria outbreak, what does this all tell us about the way food safety systems work in the U.S.?
It shows gaps. Food safety experts say the system does need to do better, needs more accountability, also needs more regulatory funding. Some food lawyers and other experts we've talked to had said this example is particularly extreme. While they have pointed blame at the companies, they've also pointed at the regulatory system, saying too often regulators defer to companies they're supposed to be monitoring. And I also think this example is important because it shows the fragility of our food system and all that needs to be done to keep food safe and the very real and severe consequences for people who eat contaminated food.
And then I guess bigger picture, putting the Boar's Head facility aside, if I think about 20, 30 years ago, were conditions worse or better when we're talking about different facilities and how clean and safe the food is? Do we know?
I mean, I think people have done this work for a while, would say that, things have certainly improved and also the traceback and the disease detective work has improved as well, but that there's also kind of more that needs to be done.
So, Rachel, this has all left me wondering about the future now of food safety and the federal government's involvement because they play a big role based on what you're sharing with me. And, Biden is exiting. We have President-elect Donald Trump coming in, and one of his big agenda items he's said is to reduce the size and role of the federal government. And he's also tapped Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to head up the Department of Health and Human Services. And Kennedy has strong feelings about food. He's also a controversial figure. Do you foresee any changes to our food system? And what are you keeping an eye on?
If Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is confirmed, he'd oversee, like you said, Department of Health and Human Services. And underneath that big department is the Food and Drug Administration, the agency that we've been talking about that regulates the majority of food. So that would be underneath him.
And the CDC too, right?
And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which does the investigating of the human illness side of foodborne illnesses. He's focused a lot on food, what's in food. He has said that he'd like to strip ultra-processed foods out of school lunches. He said that he wants to crack down on kind of the food additives found in products. Some of that has been his main focus of the Make America Healthy agenda. initiative that he talked a lot about on the campaign trail when he aligned with President-elect Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. And then what are you going to be keeping an eye on beyond just what Kennedy is talking about when it comes to what's in the food or removing food additives or ultra-processed food? In your coverage of the FDA, what will you be keeping an eye on as Trump takes office?
I think a big question will be, what do they pursue in the first 100 days? And are they trying to make school lunches healthier through regulation, which, takes a long time. The USDA is the aid department involved here. There are some people on the left who like some of the things he's saying specifically on food. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that Kennedy is saying specifically on food. But they say that campaign promises can sometimes, run aground when you're actually in the government.
And then what about, Trump has brought in Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to specifically reduce the size of the federal government. So that leaves me wondering, what does that mean for the FDA?
It's a great question. I think people will be eyeing the FDA really closely in general because the agency's received a lot of criticism from Kennedy and his allies. After the election, Kennedy said that he, for instance, would like to see the FDA's nutritionist, the current nutritionist, gone.
Rachel, finally, going back to my kitchen and your pantry, we've been talking about the government and what they're going to do, but I'm wondering what can you and I do just to ensure that the food that we've bought is safe and that we don't get sick from eating contaminated food?
We can practice good hygiene, cleaning our hands, rinsing produce. We can cook and reheat food properly, especially meats. We can make sure that we don't let our produce and other foods sit out on the counter for hours and hours when they should be refrigerated. We can also sort of be, what you were doing, being a kind of investigative reporter yourself and try and, sign up for CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Food and Drug Administration emails on recalls and try and be an active consumer in checking what these recalls are.
Well, I hope you have a good lunch today, Rachel. I'm going to risk a salad again.
Yeah, enjoy your salad.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Rachel Rubine is a national healthcare reporter for The Post. The Post is reporting on so many other stories today. So before we sign off, here are two more. First, the French Prime Minister resigned Thursday. Michel Barnier stepped down after a no-confidence vote by French lawmakers. This vote toppled the current French administration, and it's made it the shortest-serving government in the modern French Republic. The no-confidence motion was initially put forward by a left-wing alliance in France's parliament. They weren't happy when Barnier, a conservative, tried to wrangle the country's finances with steep budget cuts. But it was Marine Le Pen and other far-right lawmakers that pushed the vote over the edge. French President Emmanuel Macron had appointed Barnier to serve as prime minister just 3 months ago. Macron now has to name a new prime minister. And 5 incredibly rare Hawaiian birds have been released back into the wild. These birds are called alala, or Hawaiian crow. They nearly went extinct, but on Wednesday, scientists announced the successful release of 5 birds after they spent years in captivity. These birds are remarkable. They have a rare cognitive ability. They transform twigs into tools by grasping a stick in their beaks to dig for food in hard-to-reach spots. Only a handful of other species use tools. These birds are also considered sacred to many Native Hawaiians. Here, we can hear chanting from a special send-off ceremony when these birds were released into the wild. The alala are native to Hawaii's Big Island, but researchers released them on Maui. It's the culmination of decades of conservation work and part of a strategy growing in popularity of finding new homes for plants and animals as native habitats dwindle. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. So a bunch of us here are really excited about Spotify Wrapped. That's the year-end list of favorites that rolled out yesterday. Many people use it to brag about their impeccable musical tastes or to showcase how much of their listening is really just dominated by toddlers demanding Bluey. But I want to know, did Post Reports make the list of your favorite podcasts? If so, we want to hear from you. You can let us know by emailing postreports@washpost.com or tagging the Washington Post on social media. Today's show was produced by Alana Gordon with help from Emma Talkoff. It was mixed by Justin Garish and edited by Lucy Perkins with help from Rena Flores. Thanks to Tracy Jan. I'm Elahe Izadi. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.